Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. Jonathan and Jen welcome back Dr. Patrick Hillberg, professor at Oakland University, to delve into the significance of collective learning in teams. They explore agile methods, the role of lean principles, and the necessity of engaging human resources in PLM projects to facilitate change management. They emphasize the importance of creating an environment conducive to learning and adaptation, and the significance of collective learning in achieving project goals. Conversation highlights the need for flexibility in goal setting and the value of collaboration across teams to drive successful outcomes in project management. Let's listen in.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Stay Sharp, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. And I'm not Jen Farello. I'm Jonathan Scott, but I'm joined by Jen Farello. That's the good news. So Jen's here with us. And today, in addition to my co-host Jen, we've got Dr. Patrick Hillberg with us again, which is fantastic because we love having Pat on the show. And welcome back, Pat.
Oh, thank you. I love doing this stuff. I'm so happy that people even are interested in what I want to talk about. So,
well, and we are very interested. I hope the audience is too, because I find it fascinating, a lot of the topics that we talk about. But, on the podcast, we talk about all kinds of things related to product digitalization. But I think the thing that we're hoping to dig into today is talking about projects, how projects get done, and the learning that takes place on those. And, you're the perfect person to talk to about this because you've got a history in PLM projects. And now you teach, right? So that combination is perfect for getting into this topic and kind of digging in on something that you've written about, right? And I don't want to, sort of spoil this for everyone, and they can read the blog post as well. But collective learning, that concept of people coming together and the sharing of ideas that benefits the group and how they learn together. But that's one I think would be great to dig into. And maybe let me just tee it up there and ask you, Pat, to explain maybe in your terms better than mine, what is collective learning and how did you come to this? And what does it mean to projects and then learning?
Yeah, so let me start kind of somewhat historically. And I was a deep software person. My first degree is in computer science. And when I moved into the PLM world, I was in robotics software. And then when I moved into the PLM world, I was writing scripts and reverse engineering databases and deep down into the stuff.
All that fun stuff.
All that, yeah. There were times
we have different definitions of fun, I think. But okay.
Fair.
Sometimes they're peaceful. It's like, oh, okay, I can just spend a couple days just doing this, right? So, but I reached the point where I was starting to lead projects, and I realized that this just wasn't working. The technical people who ended up on the teams that I led were immensely valuable. But the missing piece, the kind of the X factor, was how do you get the team working well together and moving all together in one boat. There's a book that I teach heavily from, which is The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. And he has a quote in there to the extent of, why is it that people, a room full of people with IQs of 130 make decisions like they have an IQ of 60? How the group makes decisions, groups make decisions in very different ways than individuals make decisions. And we, particularly in the engineering profession, we work very strong. We devote a lot of attention to personal and individual mastery of a topic. But
Right.
Getting the collective group to work together well is a real challenge. And particularly when you think of PLM, which is really this collaboration infrastructure that we want to use to help engineers collaborate on their things, because our products are just so complicated that you have to deal with collaboration. That just led me to a very different approach on how to run projects. So, and I have now become much more, that really has become my focus. I ran a large project like that at Siemens with my previous employer. And it worked out quite well. Actually, I bumped into somebody it was 10 years ago. I bumped into somebody a year ago who said, oh yeah, we're still using that same thing in the way that you set it up. So in any event, We used agile on that project.
Mm-hmm.
Just introducing agile was a challenge. It took a while for people to kind of realize.
It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking and different way of working.
Right. And agile, it has, I think in the last 10 years, has kind of become a check the box approach. At least some are using it as a check the box approach, which I don't agree with at all.
Should we take a quick minute to basically, for anybody that it's agile isn't just flexible, right? It's a methodology. Should we take a quick minute to talk about the difference between traditional waterfall and agile, just briefly, to make sure everybody's on the same page?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll give my thoughts on it, and Jonathan.
Yeah.
So the traditional waterfall approach or the V model approach is the waterfall approach is you try to get everything figured out up front, and then you detail it out to the next group and the next group and the next group and the next group. But if you don't get the details correct at the beginning, it's really difficult to change. And organizationally, it becomes really difficult to change. My sense, agility says I'm going to change. Things are going to change. So we ran that project on 2-week sprints. And so every 2 weeks you can change your mind. The group as a whole had a vision that was probably 6 or 8 weeks out. As the lead architect, I had a vision that was 6 or 8 months out. But it was, as you learn new things, you realize that as you learn new things, you change your mind. So you need to be able to change what the requirements are. So as you move along.
I think that what I would add to that, in terms of just that definition you were talking about, Jen, right, is the key difference is that time frame and how often you're allowed to change. Like Pat was just saying, that with waterfall, you don't start doing the work until the requirements are done. You say, I need to make sure I know what my target is before I start working. And with agile, it's the opposite. It's not entirely opposite, because you can still have a target. It's just your targets are much smaller, and you work on them and then can change your mind about, has the target moved? Is it a little different? Have I added something new to the target? And that, you just iterate and you keep going. And there are pluses and minuses to both approaches, right? I don't think it's a black and white thing. And, I'll say, at least at Razorleaf, from our perspective, putting the two together works really well.
Yeah, hybrid approaches.
But
is best,
I think that's the difference in terms of just making sure people understand. When we say agile, like you said, it's not just nimble and flexible. There's an approach that involves sprints and backlogs and prioritization and ceremonies and things that people follow. But Pat, to your point, today, not everybody is really following it and understanding why they're doing it. They're checking the box sometimes and saying, yeah, I'm doing agile, but we're following the requirements we set at the beginning.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
So, and that gets into scrummerfall. We're using scrums in the midst of a waterfall, but it's like, no, you need the opportunity to recognize the fact that you learn new things in the process. Probably the thing that really triggered it for me. So when the project kicked off, actually it was a multinational project, and there really were 4 teams. There was a U.S. implementation team and a U.S. client team, and then a German implementation and a German client team. So there were 4 different groups that each had their own opinions on what to do. And I thought, okay, we just need we had decided to use Scrum, but we weren't really sure what Scrum was. So I picked up a book and said, okay, guys, we can argue with this book, but at least let's start by arguing from the same background. In any event, that book talked about the requirement process, the requirement gathering process, as building up an inventory of requirements. And as a systems engineer, you know that inventory is a bad thing. The whole Toyota production system is based on the idea of keeping your inventories low so you can recognize your problems early. And if you think of the quality circles that happen in the Toyota production system where, oh my goodness, these 2 holes aren't aligning up so that we can fit the pin through it. Why is that? Let's have a quality circle that figures that out. The whole purpose of the quality circle is to collectively learn about the system in a larger in a greater entirety, right? So, and if I've got 8 months of inventory sitting there before I realize how to fix the problem, well, what am I going to do with 8 months of inventory? So really, that was instrumental to me to say, it's like, oh, what we're really doing here is a lean approach of keeping our inventory low, and then using problems as they occur to trigger collective learning, to learn as the group.
I think that's interesting that that point about inventory, right? That you will, when I sort of put that in context of projects that I've done, that idea that, well, the first couple of inventory items you add, right? First couple of requirements you define are going to be a little rough, right? They're not going to make perfect sense. And you're also going to be getting the hang of the teams working together and with the methodology too, right? Like you mentioned, 4 different teams, even if everybody reads the book. First couple times, it's a little rough, and you want to not say, hey, let me drive through everything before, I start any work, if you can, right? I mean, that seems like a good idea, because then you learn and you improve for those next couple, and it gets better and better as you go.
Yeah, and on this project, so to tell you the truth, so I'll bring in more lean stuff. So if you go to Goldratt and Theory of Constraints, what's his book? The Goal.
Yeah.
Right, okay. There was drum, buffer, and rope. So rope was a concept of, to tell you the truth, it took a while to get the team to adopt a new methodology. But then the rope was, we're going to go live in October. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to go live with, right? You figure that out. I'm giving you a deadline, but I'm not telling you what you have to do. Right. Oh my gosh, I got to tell you, and once again, it took a few weeks to kind of get things rolling, maybe even a couple months to get things rolling. But then the pace we were making was just huge. We went live in 7 months, which my point of contact went to a big private presentation that my company put on. And he said he was the only person on stage that went live in less than 36 months. So 36 months gets you on a stage where you're talking to everybody else. And he was at 7, or we were at 7. So in any event, so the rope was, we're going to go live in October, but you tell me what we're going to go live with. The drum was Friday morning meeting. Well, let me say the buffer was, we kept a small buffer of requirements. We really only had the next maybe 4 weeks of backlog items in there, and nothing beyond that really occurred. The drum, the pace of change was, there was a voluntary Friday meeting that would talk about what progress was being made. And honest to goodness, we had 50 people showing up every Friday middle and senior managers showing up every Friday for this meeting. And what would happen is Alan and Betty would get into a conversation and Charlie would be sitting doing his email. But suddenly Charlie would realize, wait a second, what Alan and Betty are talking about impacts me too. So me as lead architect, I had no idea that Charlie was interested in what Alan and Betty were talking about. But suddenly Charlie would kick in and you realize, oh, we need to include Charlie's ideas in what Alan and Betty, I'm using A, B's, and C's here. For
Right.
Charlie suddenly realized that he has a stake in what Alan and Betty are talking about. And that would not have occurred were we not going through the Friday morning meetings. We served lunch. We served a free lunch. That was really helpful.
That always
helps.
But on that topic, actually, I want to ask another question, and this is a little bit tangential. I don't want to go too far down this path, but I think it is important in this concept of that collective learning was that was goodness, getting those people together to have those conversations, and they were learning from each other in the process. But do you think there was anything external that motivated, right? And I'm sort of taking the side road of OCM there a little bit. Like, sure. Did somebody explain to them, hey guys, this is the train, get on it or get run over by it? Or was there a leadership component or something that helped make that happen?
Yeah, there was, it worked quite well, but there was a lot of drama throughout there was still a lot of drama through the project. Without getting too many specifics, I'll the project included a CAD design component. It also included robotic automation, simulated robotic assembly line. And then a really big piece of the project was procurement. Okay. So actually first you do the robotic simulation, then you figure out what your designs are, and then as you figure out what your designs are, you procure the parts that you decided to do in your design. And it was the highly technical stuff, which was CAD and the simulation. Those teams really took off. They just loved, because suddenly they had new ways of doing what they're currently doing. For the procurement team, they said, "Oh my God, you're telling us new ways of what we're currently doing. We don't want to change." So you just brought up OCM, and I know you talked to Share PLM, who's really big on this stuff. I love Share PLM. Big shout out to Share PLM on your podcast.
Absolutely.
But so much, I believe that so much of PLM is OCM that you don't. The technology is a wonderful thing, but you need to move the culture to the technology. And really, that's the pace that's the transition that needs to be. A digital transformation is organizational change, and then you can get to what PLM does. So.
And that's what I was getting at is in that project you were talking about, did you feel like there was something that helped make that Friday drumbeat happen to get the participation you needed, right? Because in so many projects, it's like you can have the methodology and I'm speaking from experience here myself, that you can have the right plan, you can have the right people identified, but unless they feel like, hey, I need to do that meeting instead of staying in my office and catching up on my emails, right? Or Charlie, like, I will at least go and see if there's anything interesting, right? Was there something that you saw there, or is it just, no, you just got to make sure you lay that groundwork right?
I think there was both a carrot and a stick on that one. Okay. The stick was, if I'm not involved, if Charlie's not there in the meeting, Alan and Betty might make a decision that impacts Charlie, and Charlie never had a chance to talk about it, right? So it's like, some of it is like, you got to be in it to win it.
Yep. A little bit of peer pressure, right? Indirect peer pressure.
Indirect peer, yeah, right.
Or maybe I should say FOMO, right? It's fear of missing out.
FOMO. Absolutely. FOMO, even better than peer pressure, right? Yep. So, then the carrot aspect of it was, trying to get my head back on track. The carrot aspect of it was people love to learn. We are intrinsically motivated to learn. And we hate change. We hate to change, but we love to learn. So if you can put people into a situation where they can learn, and in the course of learning, they come to their own conclusions, like, oh, this would be a better way of doing that, isn't it? That really helps. So I think people learned a lot in those Friday meetings. And I think they just flat out enjoyed learning. There's a big challenge because, quite frankly, there were a lot of positions that needed to change. What people did in that company was going to change. Mm-hmm. I made this point earlier this week, actually, in a LinkedIn post, that the key person in your PLM implementation is the CHRO, the Chief Human Resources Officer. If you don't have her on board,
I bet most people do not think that. I bet that's a very unique statement to a lot of PLM projects.
Take yourself back to why does the CTO want this? So your PLM project, at some point there was a task team. There was a tiger team, which had the CTO and the CFO and the VP of sales, and the CEO was probably involved. But those, and the VP of engineering, right? So the VP of sales, the VP of engineering, the chief technical officer, the chief financial officer, what were their reasons for taking on this multi-million-dollar IT system, which is going to change the whole company? And they tend not to think about, well, hey, this is going to change the whole company. We need to think, we need to make people excited about what their new thing is. Whatever that new thing is going to be. I think that's why, two of the teams really took off so quickly, because they were excited by just flat out what the technology could do for them.
Right. They were the technology teams.
Right. But for the third team, the procurement team, they had their processes in place. It's not always, I mean, I was at other companies that said, where the CAD designer said, oh, we just did a big change 2 years ago. We don't want to do it again.
Yeah, it's always a different group, right? It's not necessarily the same, but there's going to be people who are leading the charge, people who are being dragged along behind the bus.
Yeah. but if you can get those, but those people are intrinsically desired to learn. If you just begin with the assumption that people are intrinsically desired to learn, then you look for ways as like, okay, how can I remove the barriers that you're feeling on learning or on change? Let's see, if you're resistant to change, let's take change off the table. Well, let's just give you the opportunity to learn new things. And in the course of the learning new things, they'll come to their own agreement, their own decision that what they would really like to do is change.
Do you feel like there's a step in before that, though? When you say people have an intrinsic desire to learn, I feel like a lot of times people get completely caught up in doing, that they kind of forget that they love to learn. That they just really, like, I gotta do this. I gotta do this and get a result and do this and get a result and they don't take the time to learn and bring in different aspects of that, they don't have time. They're just doing. So is part of it creating not just the environment, but the space to learn and learn from each other?
Yes, I think so. And actually, then, so after that project, suddenly I started reading the Harvard Business Review, which, so an engineer, right? And I'm reading the HBR, but there's all these organizational change articles.
Right, there's a lot in there, yeah.
Good in it. And one of the things that comes out of it is the performance cascade. So the top level in the organization says, so these are our goals for the year. And then they divide it up amongst their VPs and they divide it up amongst their directors and amongst the senior managers. And eventually each person has this set of goals that are established at the beginning of the year. It's like, these are the things you must fulfill in order to to get a raise or to move up in the company or to not get yelled at or
right. Motivations are different.
So every year, I'm sure you get a list of these are the things that we expect you to accomplish this year, and if we're measuring people strictly on those, that's basically the waterfall approach. So if we're measuring people as checking the boxes towards their end of the year performance review, then it's really hard to take the time to learn, to intrinsically learn. And that just gets
it's not motivating either, right? I mean, to your point, like if you know what the end goal is, then changing along the path of the year isn't in your best interest, right? Saying, oh, we found this thing instead. Right, taking a risk, right? Making a change. Like, it's just not in your best interest. Now I'll take a little bit of issue with that, Pat, though, which is if the goal is vague enough, right, that there is still creativity and flexibility and those kinds of things, I think you can get there. But you're right, when it's a checklist of did you do this year, when it's that kind of specificity, why would anybody do anything except work to the checklist?
Well, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about here is basically switching your mindset, right? So because we have all, and I know, Pat, I've read some of your writings about, you see this in a classroom as well, is we are taught to perform, to get a result, whether it's in a classroom and it's getting the grades or it's in your job and getting the tasks done. You're not taught to think creatively anymore. You're not taught to explore. You're not taught to no, you're taught to deliver and to change that mindset to let's find the best way of doing this and let's work together. That's a big change. And I'm meant to your point, once you get it going, you said it took weeks to months on this project, but once you got it going, then they delivered way faster than they would have. But how did you get them to that point? And I think that, Jonathan, that might have kind of been where you started this question is, how did you get to that point? How did you
that's it, right? I mean, because we've had this on projects, right, where, and I can think of a specific one a little while ago, that was you got the right team, cross-functional team across domains. You knew what the objective was. The leadership of the company had a transformational objective. Hey, want to change our business processes, really want to think out of the box here. And, got the team together and they start working on what they want to do. And very quickly it was, well, we can improve this process by doing this thing. We can improve this process by doing this. And it's like, no, transformational. But there's that gap in motivation, right? People they're trying their best. They think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they need something from the outside, some prompt, something that says, you know what?
You're doing
Take
it
a
right.
risk. It's okay. Learn something new. Talk to each other. Those kinds of things. And so Jen, you're right. That's sort of what I was asking, and I'm just interested to see, Pat. What have you seen there, or what do you think works?
Well,
how do you do it?
Yeah, actually, I did not do it. Right? None of us did it. Fortunately, my point of contact on this project was really helpful in this, and the CEO was really helpful in this. But I don't think we didn't make the change. We created the environment in which change could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As a matter of fact,
but how did you do that?
Yeah,
that's what I was asking. How did you do that? Create that space?
I want to say that probably the two things that really did it was we gave them a deadline without a set of goals. I mean, we said this is the goal actually was this company sells robotic assembly lines into auto plants, and there were a variety of different factors, like, do you use NX or do you use CATIA? Is it for this OEM or that OEM, the other OEM, right, or something? So there are different things. So at month 0, I said 7 months. So at month 0, my point of contact and I said, okay, some project is going to come to us. In the October date actually had come from before. So we just stuck with the October date. Some project is going to come to us in roughly October. It's going to be inside this box of parameters. It will be, I forget now whether it was CATIA or NX that we were doing, but one of it will be this. It will be for that OEM. Within this constraint, we're going to build a new PLM implementation, which will serve that project. We don't even know what the project is yet. We just know that one of those projects come up all the time. We know we're going to get one of those projects. So in March, we said, look, this is the sort of project we think it's going to show up in around October sometime. October is our deadline. We don't know what's needed. You guys know what's needed. Figure out what you need to do in order to meet that project. So we established a goal which was bounded but not terribly specific.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the second thing is the Friday meetings. So every Friday we would get together, and we didn't get 50 people showing up right at first. It wasn't until the meetings started. I mean, remember, sure. Actually, after the first meeting, I had to go yell at some people and say, "You got to come to a meeting."
A little bit of stick. Turned into some FOMO, but yeah.
So we gave a high level goal, and then reinforced that goal with so the high level goal was the rope, and we reinforced that goal with the drum, which was the Friday meetings. And once again, we didn't allow the buffer to get very big, because we just you could put there's one other thing that really helped. So the buffer is backlog items, which are more or less requirements, but not exactly requirements. And one of the key things was the client, a client who wanted functionality in the new system needed to take ownership over that backlog item. So we were using an agile tool for managing BLIs. That person needed to open the BLI. They needed to be the owner of the BLI. They needed to describe and say, okay, as a person in X role, I need to do Y. As an X, I need to do Y. And
good old user story format for those people who aren't familiar with it. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. So they needed to create the user story. They needed to monitor progress on the user story. And then my role as lead architect was to give them all the love that they could possibly handle. So whatever you need in order to drive this user story forward, I'll find the resources for you to help you do that. And I would look at some of those backlog items, and there would be what was effectively an email exchange of, there'd be 15, 20 items back and forth of, well, I need to do this and this. Well, what about that? What about, and you'd see 4 or 5 people in these conversations. And frequently it would eventually just evolve towards, okay, let us show you how the software can do this in a different way. And then it was, oh my God, I didn't know that could happen. And then there'd be some sort of an IT, it's like, oh, okay, over the weekend, let me configure the IT to make that happen for you. So
I see a couple of things there, Pat. I just want to jump in, right? Because, this is the heart of the episode we wanted to talk about, right? Is what you just described. That's that collective learning, right? It's not just from, a couple of resources on the client side, talking to different disciplines, but it's also the folks on the consulting team and who knows how many other team members, but let me show you how the software works out of the box. Well, let me tell you about my process. Let me explain this. Let me do, so that's the magic, right, that you're talking about. And I think there's another thing I want to highlight. I don't know if people sort of see this intrinsically, but when we talked at the beginning about waterfall and agile and the difference and keeping your buffer low, your inventory low of requirements, that kind of development of requirements with that back and forth conversation across multiple stakeholders, that's how you get a good requirement, right?
Yeah.
Me writing mine down, you writing yours down, and we don't realize we've got 2 requirements that are almost the same and we never talk about it, right? That's how you get kind of messy requirements, right? So anyway, I saw those 2 nuggets in what you're describing, and I just want to make sure people are hearing the wisdom in that.
And I'll tell you, the frustrating project that I worked on before this one was actually implementing engineering change management. And the system that we were displacing had grown up over time, and it had 11 databases to manage change. And
11, they're winning. This one doesn't go to 10, it goes to 11. That's 11. Great.
Yeah, it's funny. I just used this Spinal Tap quote last night. So there were 11 databases that were used to manage change on a really big ship. And we were bringing in a PLM system that could manage all. Well, if you look at the requirements, there were 11 requirements documents to manage change, right?
One for each system.
One for each system, right? We do this in this database. You need to do that. We do that in this database, right? And you started reading through the requirements, and you realize it's like, wait a second, there's a requirement. Oh my God! And the requirements documents were 15 pages long, like 11 documents each, 10, 12 pages. And you'd realize that requirement 37 in document 1 was in direct conflict with requirement 53 in document 4, right? So that was frustrating. When we kicked off, it was maybe 6-8 months later, we kicked off the next project and said, okay, I just don't want to do that again. So the deal on, it needed to be the client who owned the backlog item was this is your responsibility. As a matter of fact, you're the one who's going to lead the conversation on Friday to discuss it. So you ask for what you want, have the conversation, and let's figure out how to make the problem work. But if the client lost interest, then we pulled resources off that backlog item and we put resources on something else. So if you don't have the interest to come in and talk about it on a Friday morning, and then Jonathan was talking about peer pressure. And by the way, I use peer pressure in my class a lot too, but Jonathan was talking about peer pressure. If you're not prepared on Friday in front of 50 of your colleagues, right? So
you'll feel it.
Yeah, you absolutely feel it. So
hey, there's another thing you brought up a minute ago, Pat, when we were talking about that motivation topic that I think is also key, right? It just resonated with some of my experience with projects and clients, that when we talked about people being motivated, you mentioned that your client contact on the project and the CEO both were very supportive, right? And really helped. The thing that I've seen there is when people in those leadership positions understand the value of an agile or agile-like approach, and they recognize how to sort of be that buffer. And I'm meaning buffer in a different context here, right? But between the organizational goals that they might be dealing with, right? If it's a public company and they've got shareholders and they've said, look, we're going to grow by this much in this many years, those are very specific goals. Well, sometimes projects like these, if they're going to be agile-like, what you have is a vision, but not the concrete goals that say, well, we will roll this out on this date and this, because that's the waterfall method, right? So if you get a little more agile, what you need is somebody leading the project or in a leadership or sponsorship, maybe that's the better term, sponsorship position, who can say, look, we're doing this project, we're doing this transformation, whatever it might be, and we expect to get these things out of it. But I can't tell you the exact timeline. I can tell you whatever the parameters are, right? They need to be comfortable enough that there's parameters they can put in place and that the team can meet those, but still have the flexibility like you're describing to learn as they go and get to those objectives in the best way possible. But I think that, to me, when you mentioned that, that's what it triggered in my mind, that you need that support to let you have that flexibility to do this. That's more that creating that culture you mentioned, right?
You need that space. You need somebody to hold the place for learning and mistakes and, tangents, basically. Because
and to tell you the truth, the C level is not the problem. It's middle management that's the problem.
Probably because they're the most task oriented.
Right.
They're the ones in the pressure point. Like, I got to get shit done.
Right.
I don't have time for this.
I think the fundamental thing is, and it goes to the lean theory, and you look at Henry Ford versus Taiichi Ohno at Toyota. So Henry Ford said, oh my gosh, I've got to keep the line running. Make sure that I have, so even if I have to scrap a part, just pitch the part, give me the next part, right? The next one probably won't be scrapped. And inventory just kept going up and up and up and up. And actually, in the Machine That Changed the World that really talked about that, the line stopped at Ford constantly. At Toyota, basically they said, we just don't have enough room for inventory. We don't have enough capital for inventory. And we got to fix our problems right away. We can't be driven by keeping the line running. We've got to be driven by quality parts, quality components, and the line never stopped. So at Ford, you were basically fired if you ever stopped the line, and yet the line stopped anyway. At Toyota, you could stop the line if you needed to stop the line, and the line never stopped.
The irony.
It's very counterintuitive, though. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. And I think that gets to the thing about, so when we gave the team, okay, in 7 months we're going to go live, but I'm not going to tell you what we're going to go live with. We were basically saying, I'm going to give you a hard date, but I'm going to take off the handcuffs. I'm not going to, you don't have to keep the line. You have to hit this date, but we're going to take off the handcuffs in terms of how you develop the work that you're developing. And they just took off. And I'll tell you something, the two teams that were inspired, they would come in every Friday and they would try to outdo the other team. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you can do that? Let me show you what I can do, right? So
then you're really in a good place, right? When competitiveness starts to drive things. Yeah.
Right.
And healthy competitiveness.
Right.
Yeah.
It needed to be a collaborative competitiveness, but right. So
well, that makes me want to jump into something else, but since I introduced the episode, that means that I have the responsibility for making sure we don't go long. So we probably should start wrapping up. I really wanted to get into another one, but
I do too. As a matter of fact, I was just typing in our side chat, this is a great conversation. I'm having a really good time. And yet our time. So good for you for watching.
Yeah. What do you know?
Look at that, continuous learning.
That's right. Every now and then you can teach this old dog a new trick. So Pat, thank you for being with us today and jumping into this topic. I mean, I think this is really interesting. I'm glad you've brought it to the forefront and brought attention to it as, it is something that you're seeing and teaching and you're bringing to teaching, but it's something you learned from project work and see sort of those connections there. So, thanks for being on the episode today and bringing this one up and suggesting, hey, this is probably a good one for folks to hear about. So, I mean, with that, any parting thoughts, Pat, from you or from you, Jen?
I'll just add one, and then I'll hear with Jen. I bring the collective learning that I used in that project, I bring that into my teaching as well. So I think there are I think we can teach better by focusing on collective learning in much the same way that we did with Agile. So, okay, I'm done.
No, I would kind of build on that. It's, I read through some of the work that you've posted on teaching, and I think that's, as well as doing this in the work environment and the industrial, where we're trying to get things done, teaching the next generation in a different way, teaching them to think rather than just learn and regurgitate is going to be critical to our success moving forward as a community, as an environment. So
as a species, right?
Great conversation. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks again for having me. Yep.
Yeah, thank you both. Jen, appreciate your thoughts on this. Pat, thanks for being here today. And thanks to our listeners for joining us, listening into the conversation. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your feedback, your questions, topics that you'd like to talk about in future episodes. So please let us hear from you. And it is, of course, a whole lot more interesting when we do. So anyway, until next time, stay sharp, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions, please leave us a comment on our post or send an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. And if you like this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel. Till next time, stay sharp.